So our final speaker for this morning is Jean Yang. And her presentation is Expanding Perceptions of Historic Landscape Preservation, Embodied and Experiential Approaches. Thank you so much.
First, I just want to, Jorna and Martin, thank you so much. I think we can all agree this has been a fantastic conference. You all did so much work. Can we just give them all a hand? Thank you so much. And John Auwaerter apologizes that he couldn't be here, but if you ever come to Syracuse, please let us know. And sorry, I've got one more paid announcement, which is this event has just meant so much to me and the amount of community, and I wanted to pay it back in some way. So if anybody is in New York on June 12th, there's a gala for the Design Trust for Public Spaces in New York City. It's at the New York Public Library, and just write to me and we'll get you tickets to it. It would be great to just continue this conversation. Okay, I can tell from Martin that we are in a time crunch. All right, so this was at its most a 15-minute presentation, so I'm gonna just kind of zoom through. So I'm going to be talking about the work that John and I did on the Elizabeth Cady Stanton site, and something that was really fundamental to us, and that you can see from this image, is that there wasn't just one story. Even though that might have been the most legible item, there's so many different multiple stories that go into all of the sites that we design. And so the project that I was working on is a national park site that marked the 1848 Women's Rights Convention. That was really a catalytic moment for women's rights and planted the seeds for generations of activism to come. So this is where we're at. You can see where Elizabeth Cady Stanton is where Seneca Falls is. It's just at the other side, the northern side of Cayuga Lake. For all of our Cornell alumni here, we're just on the other side of Cayuga. And this is where ESF was. So it was around an hour away. So it was not a distant space, but something that was really the cultural landscape that was inherent there, and what had happened in Seneca Falls really resonated on a daily basis to our students at SUNY ESF and showed the entangled histories of justice, labor, ecology, and care. So this is an image of my students and myself at the National Park Service site, and this was a project between the Center for Cultural Landscape Preservation at SUNY ESF, the Olmsted Center, and the National Park Service. And I think we've talked about it already so much through these past couple of days. It's really a difficult time right now with the likely closure of the Olmsted Center about what gets preserved and who carries it forward. And so the studio was in many ways a living experiment in imagining new forms of cultural landscape stewardship. So what we were actually working on was specifically the Elizabeth Cady Stanton House, where she lived while she was organizing the 1848 Women's Rights Convention. And what was maybe a blessing or maybe a non-blessing is that there is almost no information. There was very few archaeological traces, just fragments and absences. So we actually got the opportunity to try to imagine what it was actually like. So what my students and I did was we actually took the really classical example of a design process, going from research and analysis to design. And we thought, how can we do this in a way that respects Elizabeth Cady Stanton when there actually isn't that much information? And what we decided to do was take a really embodied perspective. And so that meant some very silly things, like the Women's Rights Convention was actually organized and planned over tea time. So we always had tea time. We were constantly having tea time and going through the exact motions that Elizabeth Cady Stanton and her co-conspirators were doing. And we were really lucky in that Thaisa Wei came to our tea times, Tori Carter Conan, Kona Gray, all came to our tea times. And so that was, I think, maybe the easiest way to talk to the students about maybe what things were like in 1848 Seneca Falls. What they also did is their research was primarily based on primary materials, looking at Elizabeth Cady Stanton's writings. And so what they actually did is they read through their works and they created these zines about how they personally felt they interacted with Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So this is the work of one of my students, William Blakely, who talked about the canals and the unlikely effects that they actually had. This is from one of my students, KB, who talked about the huge influence of the Haudenosaunee people on the women's rights movements. And this is from Hannah, who talked about how mutual aid and growing tomatoes actually were the same. And it was such a beautiful situation because the students, through this lens of looking at it through their own personal narratives, brought to light certain things that I didn't know, that actually National Park Service didn't know. For example, one of my students, Marina, started to uncover Stanton's proximity to slavery. This is a drawing that she made of someone who was enslaved by Elizabeth Cady Stanton's father, named Peter Thibault. And so it led to a deeper line of critical inquiry about what kinds of stories and voices are erased in traditional site analysis. I also asked them to do an embodied site survey where they had to go through and kind of like imagine what the seasons were like both today and in the past. What you're seeing here are some images that they had of what are the sounds, the smells, the visuals, etc. around the Elizabeth Cady Stanton House. So this is current day. You see those big lines are actually the roads. And then this was back in 1848, and you see these lines are actually the chimneys and the smells and the candles. And so they kind of like went through this. What is spring like? What is winter like? Kind of like through these different times. And then when we actually got to the point where we came into design, this was, I want to mention, a very early design studio. This was only the second studio they ever did. So they're still trying to even like understand what a plan is. So what I did is that maybe this will play, maybe not. Okay, what I did is I actually worked with Jisoo Chu, who maybe you know her from her work with land space architecture. And we developed these Photoshop brushes of historical trees so that the students could actually, instead of kind of like spending so much time cutting out trees, actually just kind of like import it in. Oh, okay. Okay. And so they came up with these designs, which were lovely. But even in the best of times, there was no way National Park Service was going to implement one of their full plans. But we actually realized was that there were certain moments here that became really interesting to National Park Service. There were water features that were shaped on what the canals looks like. There were these ideas of paving patterns that would recreate like what the different streets that had been historically erased look like. So what we actually decided to do was take all of those final designs and start to think about how we mix it together. So what we're in the process of doing right now is taking these designs that the students made and translating those key moments into these stickers that become movable tools for other people, students, park staff, community members, to show about what they actually see the Elizabeth Cady Stanton House could look like. So this is a little bit of a recreation, is that we would give everyone these photographs of the Cady Stanton House, and then maybe some people would put in a sticker about the public harvest, recreating Elizabeth Cady Stanton's commitment to the community and helping to take care of people who may not have enough food. Maybe then other people would layer in stickers of children playing in this forest, or this kind of like tree in the background that was a really famous tree because Elizabeth Cady Stanton's daughter was an excellent tree climber, and that's how she learned actually how to be empowered. And so what you start to actually come up with is all these different ideas from the students, and their embodied experience starts to become this visual about what it would look like from all of our views. What do we connect with? Are we all kind of like connecting with trees and different elements of the Stanton landscape? And with each of these trees goes along a kind of like cut sheet, talking about what the costs are, what the annual maintenance are, the symbolic values. What you're actually seeing here is one of the stickers that we've created showing some native planting that is in the colors of the women's suffragette movement. But you can see here that we're thinking about these stickers as an aesthetic, cultural, ecological situation. So this is going to be my summer. We're running these programs with the National Park Service Rangers, with the friends of the group, with the Seneca Falls community as they're developing their local waterfront revitalization plan. And what we hope to come out of it in this really difficult time is some more, I think when we talked about when you give people an experience, that's actually what leads to it being beloved and it being preserved. And that's what we're actually hoping to do here. So that's it.
Questions?
I have a pedagogical question. Thank you for sharing this story with us. For those students who might be taking the class and they don't really know what it's going to be about and whether they're into it or not, how do you suggest inspiring them, getting them to actually care about it? Or does that happen organically? Is it sort of like, how do you make space for engaging, with students who might not have grasped the value from the very beginning?
You know what's so funny? Nobody wanted to take my class. Yeah, because I think at the start, they were like, oh my gosh, preservation, this is like so incredibly not relevant right now. I have to say, like, giving them tea time all the time, like everything was a time to inhabit Elizabeth Cady Stanton through pastries and tea, and then they were like, oh, just that act of like, we're doing the same thing, we're sitting together in the same way that Elizabeth Cady Stanton was, in some way, that was the easiest way to get them to understand it. And now they all want to be cultural landscape preservationists. Actually, I think one of my students is going to be working on Yorktown, maybe together with you. But yeah, all of them want to be cultural landscape preservationists now.
John, just a comment, really. The tea time, sort of, essentially it's a brainstorming session, I see it. We have the Auwaerter statue to the famous five ladies and the persons act to bring in sort of women to be equal to men, to be right, to be senators and judges, but it's just interesting how there's sort of cluster of figures all around having tea. But it is essentially a brainstorming approach.
It is essentially a time when we can just come together and break bread and create community.
It's very interesting to connect to you on that.
Yeah. I don't want to get in the way of lunchtime.
I understand.
No,
The one thing I will say is, like, it's beautiful work, and I love the fact that in terms of the studio assignments having the work generated, this harkens back to an earlier question that arose about digital work and having something tangible that then they have afterwards. I think is a really important piece of landscape education. So thank you for doing that.
No, thank you so much. And if anybody wants our brush set, sorry, I was trying to do a little advertisement in the background. I would be really happy to like share our brush set of these historical trees of Central New York. Thank you.